Welcome to the Heroic Investing Show. As first responders, we risk our lives every day. Our financial security is under attack. Our pensions are in a state of emergency. A single on-duty incident can alter or erase our earning potential instantly and forever. We are the heroes of society. We are self-reliant and we need to take care of our own financial future. The Heroic Investing Show is our toolkit of business and investing tactics on our mission to financial freedom.
This is Heroic Investing, episode 174. In this episode, I talk with Eric Rittmeyer. Eric is a U.S. Marine and has done quite a bit after his time of active service earlier in his life. He is a coach, he's a professional speaker, and he's a financial professional. And I don't actually get into his financial services business. He specializes in reverse mortgages, which has gotten kind of a negative image from Wall Street and from some of the SEC regulator types. And I think it could be because of some underlying interests to keep money flowing into Wall Street. For the right individuals, I love this resource, this financial tool to help out specifically aging parents who want access to their money but perhaps don't qualify for typical mortgages. Maybe they have children who also can't take over their parents' homes, buy it from them. And so the family is in this situation where they can't access liquidity that would make such a much better life for them. And then it also results in this burden for the children to have to figure out how to split up and sell the parents' home, which perhaps was not the home they grew up in, or even if it is, it may not be the home that they want to keep anymore. The sentimental value may just not be there and be sufficient to overcome the burdens of trying to split this thing up or just sell it. So I think it's a wonderful tool. It's like any other financial tool or any other tool in life, really. You know, I'm reminded of a very close friend of mine, Aaron, lender, guy that I've done much business with and is a very good friend. And he wears a hat from the Steel Chainsaw Corporation. And the reason he does that is because to remind us that the thing that it's sitting on, your mind, like any other tool, can be used for both good and bad. And so he tells a story, or he just basically paints the mental image of that chainsaw and how that chainsaw can do wonderful things. It can create wood in a very short period of time that can be used to heat someone's home. You can sculpt amazing artwork with it. You can juggle it if you're really into crazy sports. But you can also, out of malice or out of just making mistakes, you can kill people with the thing, right? And you can kill yourself with the thing very easily. So like that, financial tools can be used for good and can be used for bad. And they all have the right place and they have the right application for the right individual, right, in the right situation. So it has to apply correctly. So I didn't mean to make this a discussion about reverse mortgages, but that is a wonderful tool fit to the right family situation. We don't get into that because I don't think it fits directly with this audience. But in his other passion, he is an expert in the field of mental toughness and emotional intelligence. And really, this is where he leverages his experiences in the Marine Corps. He speaks to audiences all over the country, teaching executives and sales professionals how to overcome the limits brought on by the fear and emotions and replace them with clear, concise, critical thinking that gets results. And he's got a wonderful repertoire of businesses and executives that he has helped out. I think we get into a really good conversation. You can hear more about him at his website as we talk about here in this episode. And he's also, you can find him on YouTube, where he's been on several local television and radio shows talking about his expertise. So please help me welcome and enjoy this conversation with Eric Rittmeyer. Well, Heroic Investors, thanks so much for joining us again for another action-packed episode. This one goes a little bit off topic from investing. Certainly, my guest has the ability, as I mentioned in the introduction, to talk to you about investing and some great ideas. And I've given you contact information in the show notes to be able to reach out on that aspect. But I thought when we think about heroic investors, individuals who are looking to make that leap into what I'll call alternative investing, I mean, it's not what you're going to hear about on Money Magazine. So real estate, he's an expert in that for having done it for 15 years. But also in the mental toughness that it requires to be able to go after something like your own small business, starting from scratch, taking the leap from what's a pretty comfortable income coming from military and from civil service and then just the toughness to keep the business going or to handle the tenants and toilets phone calls you get, not necessarily in the middle of the night. But there's ups and downs. There are bumps in the road, as Jason says, with respect to investing, direct investing in real estate or other alternative investments. It takes mental toughness. And so I couldn't be more happy than to invite one of America's foremost experts on mental toughness, a previously served Marine and a real estate investor, expert on mental toughness. Eric, thanks so much for joining us here on the Heroic Investing Show.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Absolutely. So Eric, I'd like to start off, even though I gave a little bit of an introduction pre-show, talk a little bit about how you ended up at military service and what you've done and the amazing accomplishments following that.
Sure. Yeah. So I was in high school, probably like everybody else, and I didn't really have much of a clue what I wanted to do when I graduated. And school was really not on my radar. So I figured I'd go with option B, which was the military. And the Marine Corps for me was just, there was nothing else. I love the dress blues. I love the uniform. So I'm like, I got to be a Marine. So I did 4 years in the Marine Corps. I got out. I loved every second of it, loved every minute of it. It was awesome. But after my 4 years were up, it was time for me to move on to the next stage of my life. So I got out, went back to school, and I joke and say I went to the 14th grade in college. I got my 2-year degree. Got my 2-year degree, never totally finished out my bachelor's, but I joke about that. Jumped right into the real estate industry, jumped right into mortgages, and I loved it. I've done it for a very long time. I'm still currently in the mortgage industry. I do reverse mortgages as well. The mental toughness piece of it, I mean, it's something I think as prior military, like us, like anybody here on the phone call, mental toughness is something that, you hear a lot, you read a lot. When you initially think about mental toughness, you think about running 10 miles and doing push-ups and waking up early and having no sleep. And that's obviously part of it. But the simplest explanation of mental toughness is really it's emotional control. And I think what was so intriguing to me about it and why I've latched on to this topic and studied it for so long, we're horrible at controlling our emotions. And when the topic comes up about mental toughness and when people hire me to come talk to their companies, they think it's going to be, yelling in your face and screaming and getting upset with people. And it's not what it's about. It's all about emotional control. And coming out of the Marine Corps and, the feeling, or I guess you're retired, but, my feeling when I did my 4 years, they took my military ID and they cut it right in front of me. They cut it in half and gave me a ride to the front gate. And I was like, oh my goodness, that military ID used to get me everywhere back then. So it was scary. But, fast forward to today. So the whole mental toughness piece of it for me, it's about emotional control. It's about understanding, controlling emotions. And for people who are looking to go out on their own, do something that's a little bit outside their comfort zone, it can be a very scary thing. And that's where mental toughness can really be a big help there.
So how did you end up, it's not a normal combination, mental toughness and reverse mortgage or financial services industry even. Mm-hmm. Clearly you're an expert in it, having been a member serving in the services at all, but definitely the Marine Corps. But how did it come about? I mean, what's the story there? How'd you end up there?
I just love people. It's like I love watching people. I love understanding people. And a big thing for me, I was looking at what I was going through. I have 2 teenage daughters. I mean, so I've obviously learned a little bit about mental toughness over the years. And just I loved analyzing people, understanding people, and I would notice these common traits in leading salespeople and training salespeople. There were these common traits that some of the most successful salespeople had, and I just started to really dissect that and try to figure out why does somebody come into any line of work, but why does somebody come into a company? Some are extremely successful, some are not. I started looking at education. Education has nothing to do with it. For the longest time, everybody looked at IQ as being the gauge for how successful you were going to be. And you know this as well as I do. IQ really has nothing to do with success. Yeah. And the problem is you're born with your IQ. It's like, sorry about your luck. Either you have a high IQ or you don't have a high IQ. The awesome thing about mental toughness and emotional intelligence, you can grow your emotional intelligence. You can become more emotionally intelligent, whereas your IQ is your IQ. Sorry about your luck.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the stuff that you're talking about kind of hit home for me when I was reading one of Robert Kiyosaki's books, also a Marine, right? He wrote this book called Why A Students Work for C Students. So the self-employed or the specialists, the accountant, the lawyers, the CPAs, they work for the business owners. And then the B students, so why A students work for C students, why B students work for the government. And first I was like offended. I'm like, hey, I'm an A student, I'm working for the government, But I also learned, and when I actually, sat back and said, what's he trying to say with this book? It was absolutely 100% right on that phrase. And it rolls up inside there some aspects of mental toughness, but also just the laziness and the comfort that comes from kind of guaranteed kind of get addicted to a guaranteed income, right? Like, so I've met so many people, and I've experienced them personally, people who are really bad leaders. I mean, they do stuff that would not be accepted in the real world. Sure. Everyone out there listening has met these people, and they're just allowed to get away with it, right? I mean, if your performance, your way of treating other individuals, people who work for you or your peers, or even your boss sometimes, if your income, your livelihood was based on how you treat other people, it would make a difference and you would pay more attention to it, right? And it's not that way in the government. That's a little bit of a sidetrack. I meant to get to why A students work for C students. Now listen, when people build that business in their garage, or they're working as the hourly blue collar worker and decide to take their skills and start their own business doing that, that takes a little bit of mental toughness. And so it's either taught by guys like you, or they learn it on their own. But often the A students, the people who are used to getting perfect grades and always being told how smart they are, they don't have that mental toughness. And so they don't jump out there and start their own business like the people who frankly come from the military or from civil service and have the mental toughness and know what they want to do and they go for it. So you work with people like this all the time, and you have a few points that you kind of wrap up the common things that you see in all these people. Talk to us about those.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you just hit on a couple things there, mainly about the jumping out, going outside your comfort zone, starting your own business, doing whatever. I got to tell you, the number one thing I deal with, and probably the best bit of advice I could give, it's all about approval addiction. That is the number one thing I deal with, and it's really the number one thing that's just I call it the success killer. Facebook everybody,
effect, right?
Exactly. I mean, we're in this day and age right now of we are addicted to the approval of every single. It doesn't matter if they're family, if they're friends, doesn't matter. So we're addicted to the approval, and the problem is when you're addicted to that approval, that translates into fear of rejection. So from a sales standpoint, a lot of what I deal with are people who are not doing well in sales because they're afraid of getting rejected. They take an emotional hit when they're told no. So when we're looking at this fear of rejection, we're saying, okay, is this the cause or just the effect? We're treating it as the cause, but it's really just the effect. It's the effect of the approval addiction, which is the actual cause. So for a lot of people who are apprehensive about jumping out, it normally boils down to they're afraid what everybody's going to think about them. It's Facebook 101. How many likes do I get? It's like I'm upset because somebody doesn't like my picture. It's unfortunate, but it's very, very true. That is the number one thing that I deal with daily. Approval addiction, people who are staying inside their comfort zone because they're afraid of everybody else.
Yeah, that is a great point. That is an awesome point. I'm dying. Number two.
Yeah, so number two is the ability to, this sounds kind of silly to say, but it's really thinking about your thoughts. They call it metacognition. It's thinking about your thoughts. And a mentally tough person is able to constantly analyze their own thoughts. So I know it sounds silly, but you're thinking about your thoughts. So you take these beliefs you have in your life and you have to go back and ask yourself some critical thinking questions. Why do I have this belief I have? And unfortunately, when I train people and when I start asking them the critical thinking questions, they don't really have any kind of statistical data that backs their beliefs. They're basing it off of a feeling, an emotion. The problem is when you base your beliefs, when you base the way you do business off of an emotion, that's the recipe for failure. There's no statistical data behind it. So critical thinking requires people to take all the beliefs they have, turn them upside down, and ask themselves critical thinking questions. Why do I believe what I believe? And that's hard to do. People have a very difficult time doing that. And when I do that with the people I train, they get upset about it.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of, if I believe what you're saying is not true, that means I've been thinking wrong for 30 years and I'm not willing to go there, right? And
exactly.
So you're talking about checking your pretenses, right? Checking what's running through your head. And I've been doing a lot of work on, I've been studying Joe Dispenza's work on forming habits, forming mental remapping, basically your thoughts, remapping what is that series of subconscious things that's kind of running your world in the background. And also studying Master Key System with my accountability group to the point where it's like reading one of those 5-line poems you used to do as a kid and you spend 3 hours on it, right? And you're like, oh my God, are we going to analyze every word? So we're taking Master Key System to that level, and Handel's work is just incredible. But we're in the section right now where we're talking about, the subconscious does not question the programming, right? When you're analyzing something in your brain, the conscious side, and you decide, well, that's true, then you pass it along and it's true until something causes you to think about it again, right? So all the subconscious stuff that happens, like you grab the beer at the end of the day and don't really think about, I badly need a beer. It's just happening, right? And you never question, is this good for me? Right?
Absolutely. And it's the whole mindset. And there's no quote that way. It basically says, what the mind attends to, it considers. What the mind does not attend to, it dismisses. With the mind, it tends to continually believes, and what the mind believes, it eventually does. So basically what that all says is your brain doesn't understand current, present tense, past tense. What you plant inside your brain is what it finds a way to make happen. So we call it middle class thinking. From a middle class thinking standpoint, middle class people view it as, I'm comfortable. I don't want to go outside my comfort zone. Money's the root of all evil. More money, more problems. They plant these things in their head, and unfortunately, it becomes reality. So we refer to as middle class thinking versus world class thinking. World class thinkers, they understand. They know they're responsible for their results. Whatever thought they put in their mind is the result they're going to get.
Yeah. So guard what comes inside your head, right? So it's just like being the sentry standing there, at the guard post. Like, you need to guard what you let inside your head. To the point where if you don't like fighting people off at the gates all the time, then you got to do what Jim Rohn talks about and be careful who you're standing around. Like, be careful who you hang out with, right? Because you hang out with negative people, with people that are kind of stuck in their way and not interested in moving, then really what you're doing is constantly battling people at the gates, right?
Birds of a feather flock together. And that's the other thing emotionally intelligent, mentally tough people are really good at. They do not allow anyone to hijack their feelings. So I feel the way I feel. I have complete control over my emotions. That's the one thing I have complete control over. I can't control you, how you feel, what you think, if you're angry, if you're happy, if you're sad. But I personally have 100% control over my emotions. Mentally tough people are really, really good at not allowing anybody to change the way they think and the way they feel.
Yeah. I've recently reread Dr. Frankl's work about time in the concentration camps. And that was one of his biggest things, right? Is that, they can strip you of all of your physical beings. They can strip you of all of your privileges. And they can prevent you from having food. They can beat you. The last thing that you will always have control of for your last dying breath is how you respond to things, what you let inside, and your emotions, right? So how you respond to whatever happens, you get to choose that, which is pretty awesome.
It is. We have total control. The problem is we're horrible at controlling the emotion. We see it all the time. It's people in these situations, especially in business situations, they allow their emotions to overcome them. So we call it getting drunk in emotion. There's so many things that happen that people get drunk in emotion. They're incapable of thinking logically, which translates into making bad decisions. So they're inversely related. Emotion and logic is inversely related. As you get more emotional, you're less logical, and vice versa. In business, 99% of the time, you don't want to be making decisions based on emotion. I'm not saying there's not a purpose. There's a purpose for them. But in business decision making, it needs to be based off of logic, not emotion.
Yeah, and recognizing that we're really emotional beings, that you realize how often that can take control of us, right?
And we get no training on that, Gary. That's the problem. Is as prior military, we get training on that. Not extensive training, but we have no training on any type of emotional training. I call it psychological performance training. We get nothing on that. So people go through school, they test, they memorize, they test, they get out, they go to lead a company, they go into a sales force, they have no idea how to communicate with the person next to them. They're not empathetic. They don't understand other people's emotions. And before you know it, they're upsetting people. People are getting fired. They quit. It's the inability to control emotion, and we have no training on it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've done a ton of work recently, and that could possibly be my biggest challenge ever, at least of habit controlling kind of things, or improving myself, self-improvement challenge, I would say, in my life, is trying to focus the phrase, it's not about me. I learned this from Zig Ziglar, and it's not about you, it's about who you're serving. And it's when some event happens in your life, how can I help this other person? And that's really, really hard. I also love like Ayn Rand, for example, and the Ayn Rand Institute. And she's about, it's only about you. It's the only thing that matters. And so I kind of get both points, but they certainly work against each other. I've done a lot of work trying to not internalize, not take personal things that happen in life, like own them, say that I caused them, but not to the point where, why is this happening to me, right? If you can just say, what opportunity does this provide? The book, The Obstacle is the Way, for example, what a great book that talks about this is a journey and you should embrace new challenges. I guess my question is there a more of a shortcut than the approach that I've taken about trying to limit your emotional response, taking deep breaths, what do you tell salespeople when the door slams in your face, the person emails back real quick, sorry, I've changed my mind, I'm not moving forward. How do you help them in those situations?
Yeah, the best bit of advice, and we refer to it as systematic desensitization. So don't ask me to spell it, but I can explain it. I'm not as smart as you, Gary. I'm not as many books as you read. You've read a lot of books, by the way. Systematic desensitization is basically just like it says. Systematically, you desensitize your brain to whatever the fear is or whatever the pain is. So really good, mentally tough people, they're systematically desensitized. So they take someone like a cold calling standpoint, and a mentally tough person will cold call and cold call and cold call until they view all the no's and all the rejection as a game. So they look at it as, and some of the top salespeople I deal with, they all say the same thing. They're like, hey, I get paid the money I get paid because I get rejected nonstop. It's all I do is get rejected. But I know it's not me. I understand it's nothing that has to deal with me internally. It's nothing to do with my personality, with my sales skills, with my height, with my weight. It has everything to do with somebody doesn't want my product. That's it. Simplest way to put it. So really, really good mentally tough salespeople, they're very, very good at understanding. It has nothing to do with anything other than it's a job, and rejection's a big part of it.
Yeah, that took me back to reminding me again of Kiyosaki. He says in Rich Dad Poor Dad that the thing that he credits with most of his sales skills came when he got the advice to, if you want to learn how to sell, you learn how to fail faster. And so he took up a job on I think it was like a charity hotline, a call center, right? Mm-hmm. So, he's like, I'm getting rejected 1,000 times a night now. It would take me months to get rejected like that selling my Xerox copiers. Right. Totally true. Because you get desensitized to it, right? I never really put a word to it until you just said that. So that's fascinating.
Yep. It's like military training too. It's like boot camp. It goes through boot camp, and it's like the first, like Marine Corps boot camp, like any other branch, but Marine Corps boot camp, you get off the bus, you get on the yellow footprints of Paris Island. They're in your face, yelling, screaming, going nuts. You're like, oh my goodness, bumping into people. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, it's like, yawn. Okay, yeah. I'm used to this now. You know what I mean? Not really yawn, obviously, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, You're much more balanced, and it's not, and it's not really building up a wall against it. It's just kind of changing your ability to handle it, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's understanding that it's understanding it's a game, and that's what it boils down to. And again, the most mentally tough people understand it's a game. They're not afraid of discomfort. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, if you want to put it that way. They're okay with going outside their comfort zone. We fall into this rut, in the military, it's that way. We fall into this rut of comfort. We know when we're going to eat. We know when we're going to bed. We know what our paycheck's going to be, or I'm assuming the government functions. We know what our paycheck's going to be. So we know all these things. You come out of that, and we live the rest of our lives living inside that comfort zone, afraid to step out of the box because we're afraid people aren't going to approve of us.
Yeah, I'd like to take this little short part of the discussion back to where we started, which is that you get the opportunity to respond, right? You get to make the choice of what that response is going to be. I remember I was talking with one of my very close friends, Aaron, and I was mentioning, like, yeah, man, I'm stressed out right now because coming up, I've got 2 meetings. I'm not really prepared for either one of them, and it's a decent chance I'll blow both of them because I haven't adequately prepared. And then I was also talking about how sometimes people don't show up, and that's very frustrating, wasting my time. He's like, dude, that's not a waste of your time. It's like, you choose to say that's a waste of your time. You can look at it as a gift. Like, for example, what if the first person of these 2 doesn't show up? And that allows you to, it's a gift to you, and you approach it that way, and it gives you time to prepare for the second one, and you knock that one out of the park. And actually, that's exactly what happened. And I did see it as a gift. So again, it was just me choosing, right? Like, I used to get down on the fact that these people would blow me off and not show up, and I wasted all this time, and man, this profession sucks. But I get to choose. Like, I could also choose it was a good deal, right?
It's not what happens to you; it's what happens within you, and that's the old phrase.
Yeah. And I think when people realize that, I don't know if you have techniques to remind people of that or help people with that. My advice and what I've gone through is words of affirmation, like this process of every day I do some affirmations about free time that comes to me that's unexpected is a gift, and I'm going to use it to my advantage, and just stuff like that to remind myself, right? Because again, I'm brainwashing in a good way my head with messages I want it to get.
Yeah, and seeing that's the problem too. We have these, everything we see is seen through these filters, and these filters, unfortunately, have been developed over our years since we were children. So we view things certain ways. We have these patterns that we sense. The number one bit of advice I would say for situations like that and how to handle those type things is to understand your triggers. We all know what those hot points are. They're going to set us off the deep end. Understand the triggers and understand that's the biggest problem with emotion. By the time you get drunk in emotion, it's too late. You've already, before you know it, you're walking out of a conversation. An hour later, you say, oh my goodness, why did I say that? Because you were so overwhelmed in emotion, you couldn't think logically. So the key is to try to understand the triggers. When you sense them, when you walk into an environment where one of those triggers are there, be careful in how you respond, knowing that you're probably going to be dealing with it from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Very solid. I think there was another point or 2 still.
That was the main thing. I would say separating the emotion from logic is one of the biggest things. It's the ability. It's just basically understanding that you have to view things. You go into business, people say, well, Eric, you're saying I shouldn't think emotionally, so there's no place for emotion in business. I'm not saying that. There's always a place for emotion everywhere, but it's more about using the emotion for the why and the logic for the how. Understand they both serve a purpose, but knowing when to use which one.
That's awesome. And there's, emotion can help you in the right situation. Absolutely. But I think awareness, right? Being aware, of yourself, of when you are becoming emotional. I've done a lot of work with meditation. A lot of it comes from the Master Key system, but over the last few years, I've gotten a lot better at it. But there's just a couple of really good techniques, I think, that I'm much more aware of when I become emotional and able to control it and back it down, right? And it's so helpful, whether it's mad or stressed out or whatever, right? Even being too happy can mess you up in this profession. So having the ability to do box breathing, that's a simple technique, right? To bring your heart rate down. Just spend a couple minutes visualizing or something, right? So there's just so many easy techniques to help bring the emotions down, get yourself centered again logically.
And it's not just your emotions either, Gary. I mean, it's, self-awareness obviously is being aware of your emotions, but it's also understanding other people's emotions and how they're going to dictate you, and that's the key to them. So self-awareness is a very big piece of it, but you have to understand, you mentioned it just a minute ago, every conversation you have with somebody, you're going to leave that conversation feeling one of a few different emotions. Happiness, sadness, anger, fear, or shame. So you're going to feel one of those 5 emotions every conversation you leave with somebody. And it's not just you, it's understanding other people. So self-awareness is important to understand how you leave that conversation, but it's also important to understand how that other person leaves that conversation. Because again, it's going to fall into one of those 5 different emotions.
That's awesome. Great. I really appreciate you getting those points out. Those are big. What else on the topic of mental strength do you feel, mental toughness, that we haven't covered?
Covered everything pretty much in a big nutshell there. I mean, the one last thing I would say to kind of summarize all this up would be responsibility. That's another thing that mentally tough people are really, really good at. They accept full responsibility for their actions. They don't blame anyone. They're not out there trying to point fingers. Mentally tough, emotionally intelligent people are very, very good at understanding I am 100% responsible. If I'm succeeding, it's because of what I've done. If I'm failing, it's because of what I have not done. They're really good at understanding they're 100% responsible. They're not going to point the finger at anyone.
I've been experimenting with my poor children about trying to get them to take accountability for everything that happens in their life. And I know that might be pushing it a little far. But what I've learned in doing that myself is that when you just say, all right, I'm owning it. That was my fault. A bird drops on your head, okay, I owned it. That was me. But maybe it wasn't actually you. But what it does is in my opinion, in my experience, it takes the emotion out of it. Like, okay, well, I'm not mad at anybody else, because if you can play victim by blaming it on anything else than yourself, then that feels good in the moment, but then you get caught up in it, right?
Yep.
You can just say, boom, I owned it. That was me. Let's move forward. Like, what am I supposed to learn from that? Or what can I learn from that? But let's move.
Yeah, and because it's easier to blame than it is to accept responsibility. And again, that's what we see between middle-class thinking and world-class thinking. The middle-class people, unfortunately, just always looking for a reason to blame somebody else. It's not me. Must be you. Must be them. That's just not the way it is. So mentally tough people are good at understanding that they're 100% responsible for their own results.
Yeah, but and you're right. It's easier in the moment, but I think it's a much harder life. And
it absolutely is.
Saying too, right? So, but if you can develop a little bit of mental toughness and just take ownership for things and not look to become entitled or to blame somebody else for it, it's harder in the exact moment, but life gets so much better over time,
It sure does, because then what you end up realizing is you have 100% control. So in the mindset of it's everybody else's problem, in that mindset, that person has no control over anything. Right. It's everything that's exterior that's affecting where they are. Once you realize it's all on you, floodgates are wide open. You have 100%. You can do whatever you want to do at that point. So initially, maybe there's a little more pain, but in the long term, you understand you write your own ticket. Yeah.
It's funny how, brainwashing has become this prisoner thing that you can't do for prisoners, right? Or a mental method of torture. But man, I think it's awesome, especially if you're using the right materials.
I tell you, I think the best method of torture for me is teenagers. I mean, just run them for like a month. That is done. I'd rather be waterboarded.
Not exactly where I was going, but that was a good one.
Right.
So I think if you can just, bottom line is that if there's good stuff going into your brain, it can't hear the bad stuff.
Junk in, junk out, right? That's what
right, right. And the easy way to block yourself from eating that thing you don't want to, listening to that stuff you don't want to, or whatever, is be, saturating yourself with good stuff. So if you get up and you read a good book, you listen to good podcasts, you hang around people who got good messages, that insulates you, right? The bad people don't get to the gate where you're standing guard. Mm-hmm. And therefore you can let your mind and your subconscious work on things that are good. And they just, I believe it's a snowball that starts rolling in the right direction for life.
Sure.
Man, this was a very quick 30 or 40 minutes that we just ran through there. Eric, tell everyone how they can find you. I'm not sure I got it all correct in the introduction. So we want to make sure we have it here and in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place is my website. It's mentaltoughnessspeaker.com. It's a mouthful. mentaltoughnessspeaker.com. And I do 3-hour programs. I travel around the businesses doing 3-hour live programs called Mental Toughness Bootcamp. So I'd love to help any way I can. If there are any questions or comments from any of your listeners, I'd obviously love the feedback.
That's awesome. And so I saw a lot of businesses with some realtors and stuff like that, salespeople. Ever do military or any government organizations? Yeah, the Mental Toughness Bootcamp is just a general it's a 3-hour program that really can be for anybody. Primarily, it's for people, sales-related industries or entrepreneurs. Then I also have specific ones for realtors, mental toughness for realtors and loan originators, like mortgage people. So I know the business, I understand the business. But the Mental Toughness Bootcamp is really for any type of business who has a sales team. That's awesome. Eric, thanks so much for joining our audience, man. I look forward to getting you back. Maybe next time it'll be on your other topic. I'd love to, Gary. Appreciate the time. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.